just say we're starting whenever. And then the names part we'll figure out.
Okay. Wow. Wow, that's great. Okay. Good morning, as we say. I hope you're used to it already. A good Erev Shabbos, happy Erev Shmita. Every week that goes by, it's like Friday afternoon. This whole year is like Friday, 6th day. So Friday morning, you don't have to be so pressured. Comes noon, you already begin thinking about it. You know, we're like at 1 p.m., 2 p.m. now. You know, it's not like down to the wire yet, but this is the time you got to start paying attention. Exactly. No, summer. Okay. Baruch Atanu from Stockholm. I just saw Shavara Veda returning lost property. Perhaps anyone noticed, may have forgotten here like a briefcase, a gray briefcase a couple of weeks ago. If anyone notices it, I asked Judy, but if anyone saw it, thank you. And I see even today, we don't have a whiteboard, but we actually have a problem. We're talking about irrigation, watering your garden. So it's great. I really appreciate that. So, it's okay. You know, if it's available, fine. If it's being used, for sure not. If it's a trouble, forget it. Okay. So I gave away what the topic is today. Shmita, it's kind of hard to classify. It's kind of hard to set a one standard route. Like we have a shiur here, we have a course. You know, how do you approach it? For example, we come back to this again and again. When you're learning Hilchot Shabbat, how do you go about that? You go malacha by malacha. You know, first you talk about bishul, cooking, and then you talk about borer, separating. But within each of those malachas, borer, that could be about, it could happen in the kitchen when making a salad. It could happen at the dining room table when you're being finicky about your peas and your carrots. It could happen in the bedroom when you're looking for 2 socks. And it could happen in the kids' room when you're trying to figure out what Lego goes to what set, right? So do you teach by the halachic principle, or do you teach by the practical application? You know, here's the halachas of kitchen, here's the halachas of toys on Shabbos, halachas of clothes on Shabbos, and so forth. So the same is true in Shmita. One way to arrange it is kind of by scenario. The garden in Shmita, the kitchen in Shmita, the household plants in Shmita, which we talked about. And one way is the halachot, zriyah, sowing, ktsira, reaping, hashka'ah, irrigating, watering. So in the end of the day, in most classes, in most books, it's a little bit of both. We want to also pay attention to what the halachic principle is, but just kind of to organize it in our mind. Our minds aren't usually organized in a halachic way. Thank you very much. We'll figure out what to do with this. How to do this in 1 second. I'll take care of it. Thank you. It's a little bit of both. So today's class is from if you put on your halachic spectacles, if you're looking at it from a halachic point of view, as I said, the topic is officially hashka'ah, which just in Hebrew, it's a little mini ulpan. The word in modern Hebrew, hashka'ah, like many things, depends if it's an ayin or an aleph. It's just a totally parenthetical comment, so don't get confused and uses it wrong because of me. Hashka'ah will be usually in modern Hebrew with an ayin, and it means investment. You know, your hashka'ah, what you invested is reaping good fruit. It's prospering. Hashka'ah with aleph in halachic or halachic Hebrew or Talmudic Hebrew means to water. Like lahashkot, right? Usually in modern Hebrew, I believe, I'm not an expert, you wouldn't say hashka'ah if you call your gardener. I want to talk to you about the hashka'ah. He would tell you to go to the banker. That's because in Talmudic Hebrew, hashka'ah really means watering. In Hebrew, modern Hebrew would say hashkayah. Hashkayah. All right, as in mashke, like as in a drink or a l'chaim. So that's the topic in Hebrew, hashkaya, in halachic, hashka'a with an aleph. And in terms of the practical applications, we're going to really try to touch on the principles of the home garden. I mean, no one here is has a farm and is dealing with kind of on an industrial agricultural scale. So we're going to talk about, of course, our more homegrown applications, which will include the garden, which will include, I don't know if that really exists so much in Eretz Yisrael, or certainly not in Tzfat, a lawn. Remember that, like the green thing? Not the kind you buy at the shear center, also, I guess, if you don't have that lawn or a garden, but even watering, if you do have some potted plants outside. Last week we said potted plants under a roof, you can water as you please. So those are the applications we're going to touch on. Around the garden. The principles we will learn today will also apply to other milachot, other restricted or prohibited activities, such as perhaps pruning or weeding or fertilizing or things like that. But the main focus is going to be on hashkaya. And as we usually do, we're going to discover a few general halachic principles and some good halachic terminology to make us kind of more at home, if you will, more literate in the world of halacha. Here is the source sheet for those of you on Zoom. I believe Judy sent it as a WhatsApp. You can get this sheet as a PDF or as a Word document on WhatsApp. I hope I have enough. And forgive me if I do not. If someone wants to volunteer and just take a picture and do it digitally, I would appreciate that. As the state of these source sheets indicate, they're usually done, put it this way, the ink may still be fresh, be careful. They're done on the fly. So today really is a continuation of last week. Last week, we talked about the distinction between milachot d'oraita and milachot d'Rabbanan. The restricted activities or activities or labors in the field, which are forbidden from the Torah, and those which are forbidden or prohibited midrabanan. Now, we said last week, and I'll just say it again, both Doraita and Drabanan, as far as binding, are equally binding. But it's very important to know in Shmita that it's very important to know which activities. There are approximately 22 different activities. You all know 39 melachot on Shabbat. The Chazon Ish counted 22 melachot Drabanan, 22 prohibited activities from the rabbis. These were instituted because of their great similarity to the big four. Last week we saw the big four, the four things which are explicitly mentioned in the Torah as prohibited, right? Sowing, pruning, reaping from the field, and gathering from the vine. And the Chazal instituted about 22 or perhaps a couple more activities which are very, very similar but aren't defined as. However, as we're going to see, when they instituted it, they took into account various extenuating circumstances which create leniencies. When the Torah said it, it's black and white. Torah said it. Torah said it. There are no leniencies or extenuating circumstances. Barring a pikuach nefesh, barring a danger to life, which is the ultimate extenuating circumstance. But when the Chachamim instituted the rabbinic prohibited labors, the malachot, they were built in. Now, why am I emphasizing built in? Because it's not like, oh, the Chachamim said this is prohibited, and Simcha, I have a problem. That's going to cause me a lot of damage. That's going to cause me financial damage. It's going to cause me tremendous inconvenience. It's going to cause me embarrassment, or all kind of other factors. So now I'm like weighing, what's more important, the mitzvah d'Rabbanan or my embarrassment or my financial loss? That's not what's happening. We only are listening to the mitzvah d'Rabbanan. But within, embedded, when the Chachamim said and instituted this ordinance, if you call it that, this takana, they originally said and this applies under regular circumstances. However, this does not apply if A, B, or C. In other words, we're not taking an outside value and overriding the Chachamim. What it means is that the Din D'Rabbanan is built in with certain leniencies, and that's why in Shmita it's very important to know what is what. And we're going to see that in the Gemara here, and it specifically applies to watering, to irrigating, whatever. Is there a better term? That's what you call it, right? Watering, right? Water your garden? Yeah, okay, great. So the Gemara in Moed Katan, I mentioned last week that Moed Katan, dealing with the laws of Chol HaMoed, has a certain connection to Shmita, because also on Chol HaMoed, intermediate days of Pesach and Sukkot, we're prohibited from doing certain activities, just like in Shmita. Shmita, you can turn on the light, it's like, you can drive your car, but it also has certain prohibited agricultural activities. So the Gemara cites the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Mashkin beit hashlachin b'moed u'bashvi'it. One may irrigate a field that requires irrigation on the intermediate days of a festival, Chol HaMoed, as well as during the sabbatical year. Now, it's clear that we have two separate worlds of halacha here, Chol HaMoed and Shmita. It's almost a coincidence that they both have halachot governing, can you irrigate or not irrigate a field? The laws governing Chol HaMoed are really powered by tircha, being burdened, being overly burdened by a malacha takes away from your simchas yomtiv, from your pleasure and joy on the festival. So it's basically measured what you can and can't do on Chol HaMoed, whether it's a pain or not a pain. Okay, that's kind of the rule of thumb. Shmita, and I want you to know this, just like Shabbos, right? It's more of a pain to be in the dark and walk to shul than it is to turn on the light and drive to shul. Shabbos, as we know, is not about tircha, whether it's a burden or not a burden. It's about specific categories of creative activities. So too, Shmita is not connected to, is it a big deal? Is it a pain? Is it a burden? Remember, we're not trying to promote a farmer's rights. We're not trying to give the farmers a break. We're trying to give the land a break. So it's not a big deal if it's a burden or not a burden. So this is the jumping point into the Gemara. The Gemara then says, wait a second. I understand why there may be certain leniencies to irrigate a field. Okay, maybe somewhat of a pain to irrigate a field, but hey, the field needs it. You can do that. It's not such a big deal. It's not like you're digging the ditch or you're not starting a new canal. You can irrigate. But why are you allowed to water a field in Shmita, a field that needs irrigation? We're talking here about a field that is not sufficient to receive just from the rain, either because of the climate or because of the crops that are grown. There's some crops are more water intensive, citrus and so forth. Maybe I assume vineyards also. They water vineyards, right? They have irrigation in vineyards, right? Yeah, right. Olive trees also, I imagine, right? So, or not necessarily. They can go other ways. But let's say an orange grove, it needs to be watered. So you're allowed to do that in Shmita. Why? Watering should ostensibly be a subcategory. We called this last week a tolada, an offshoot, an offspring of zoreya, of sowing, of planting, because planting creates growth. Watering also creates growth. I'll just note again, just for your background knowledge, there are opinions here in this Gemara that watering is not so much an offshoot of planting, of sowing, rather of choresh, of plowing, because both activities kind of prepare, nurture, cultivate the earth, right? And it's not looking at the watering that it's bringing the crops forth, but rather that it's something that's preparing earth. So that's the discussion in this context here. But be that as it may, this is prohibited in Shmita. Why does the Mishnah allow us to irrigate a field? So it could say, we're not going to have anything to eat, right? We'll die. We'll die of starvation. Okay, so if that would be the case, then obviously that would be very limiting, because only if it's bona fide danger to life would you be allowed to do that. If that were the case, that's fine. The Gemara assumes, put it this way, if it would be pikuach nefesh, I'm not sure you would need the Mishnah to tell you. In other words, otherwise you would say, you would say a lot of things. You can drive in an ambulance on Shabbos. We know the principle of pikuach nefesh. The Gemara seems to understand that this is more about, let's call it a routine activity, and that I guess it's possible to exist, which it is, by the way. If you're raising wheat and grain, Israeli farmers, as I told you last week or 2 weeks ago, do not irrigate their grain field. It wouldn't be economic because the per dunam revenue wouldn't justify so much water. In other words, it's very, very spread out, and water is expensive. So they don't water. They really, really rely on the rain for the grain in Israel. So I don't know what happens in America, like in the Nebraska wheat field. Do they water it? They have a lot more water, so maybe they don't care. They have more rain also. Say they have more rain and they have more water. I'm just curious, does the grain in America irrigate it, or just right? Yeah, you have winter wheat and spring wheat. Yeah, right. Right. So be that as it may, the Gemara didn't jump immediately to the red button. Pikuach nefesh. That would just for sure answer the question. The Gemara seems to assume that even if it's not pikuach nefesh, this Mishnah is allowing you, perhaps similar to Chol HaMoed, right? The reason you can do it on Chol HaMoed is not because pikuach nefesh. We're not going so extreme yet. So what does the Gemara say? The Gemara says, I just talked out the Gemara, by the way. What I just said was written here. The Gemara says, granted, with regard to the intermediate days of the festival, where the prohibition against irrigation is due to the mandate to avoid excessive exertion on the festival, tircha burden, I understand that. So therefore, in a case of considerable loss, yes, it's a burden to irrigate, but it's a considerable loss, not loss of life, loss of parnasa, loss of money, because a field that needs water, if you don't water it, the crops are going to die. Not only won't you have the revenue, but you're going to lose your investment. You have to plant that. That costs money also to plow and to plant. So since Chol HaMoed is, let's call it D'Rabbanan, the whole problem is just burden, excessive exertion. We'll do the 1-to-1. We'll say go for it. However, during the sabbatical year, both, it doesn't make a difference, both according to the one who said that one who waters is liable due to the prohibition against sowing, and according to one who said that one is liable due to the prohibition against plowing. Whatever reason you want to say watering is a problem in Shmita, because it's like plowing, because it's like planting, but are sowing and plowing permitted during the sabbatical year? How could the Mishnah allow you to water your field? Again, a field that needs water, but you're shekharech, it needs water, but that's what Shmita is. It means don't water your field. I know it needs watering. That's the whole point of Shmita. So the Gemara says in the name of Abaye, I told you last week, Abaye is one of the central Talmudic sages of Talmud Bavli, of the Babylonian Talmud. Abaye said the Mishnah is referring to the sabbatical year in the present time when the prohibitions are only by rabbinic decree. In our lashon, our language of the Beis Medrash, D'Rabbanan. So, and then the Gemara goes on to prove that Shmita Bizman Hazeh is D'Rabbanan. It seems to be a dispute, but that's what the Gemara is saying. Okay, that's great. You helped me a little bit. You told me Shmita is only D'Rabbanan, but Rabbi, didn't you just tell me even if Shmita is D'Rabbanan is still D'Rabbanan? So who says that the fact that the field is very thirsty and needs water, you took it from Doraisa to Rabbanan, but what does that help me? So the commentaries here all explain that what I told you in the very beginning, that when it's a D'Rabbanan, the rabbis did not enact the prohibition in cases of significant financial loss. Hefsed, if there will be a destruction, if there will be a loss. We see this very beautifully in the next source. It's interesting. Everyone says it. I saw in all the Mefarshim, all the commentaries, they all read right into Abaye. It's the Rabbanan, and then kind of in parentheses, the commentaries add, and in cases of loss, the rabbis didn't. I didn't. I'm not the biggest expert. I didn't see that there. I was trying to understand where did they draw that from. I'm wondering if they didn't. I could be wrong. It could be from another source, but one source where we do see explicitly this difference between something which is a loss or not a loss is a very interesting Gemara in Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah just again, we like to give source references. Avodah Zarah, of course, means idolatry. And there's a funny story I just read on Shabbat where this young Hasidic woman 150 years ago comes to the Rebbe, to the Tzanzer Rebbe, Chaim of Tzanz, and says, Rebbe, I married this great Talmud Chacham. He's such a sterling boy, best boy in Lakewood, whatever. And I see he's learning. It's great. Now all of a sudden I see he has this big book, and I know how to read Hebrew. It says on top, Avodah Zarah. And I'm trying anything I can to get him away from it. Nothing is working. What do I do? My life is ruined. The tire Meidele. I want you to know, Avodah Zarah has the halachas of how to deal with Avodah Zarah. It's a very holy sefer, and so forth. So the person who told that story, if I already told the first part of the story, the end of the story goes, in those days, someone was really learning a Gemara, and the wife, and it was thought that they were learning Avodah Zarah. So he said it's reverse art. He was making fun of people with, again, nothing personal. Here I have the tablet, but people with smartphones. So he's saying, you have a smartphone, Gewalt. It's Avodah Zarah. No. I have this sefer, and I have Tehillim, and I daven. He's saying it's the reverse, right? That was really a holy book that looked like Avodah Zarah, and he said that the smartphone is, and people is. Okay, so I saw that by the way, in Rav Melech Biderman said that. Anyway, so look at this Gemara in Avodah Zarah. This Gemara in Avodah Zarah, really for halachic, practical halacha, is probably the rule of thumb in the whole halachas of Shmita. This almost everything comes from this Gemara. It's almost a one-line Gemara, but it's a very powerful Gemara. The Gemara is trying to figure out. There's a whole back and forth there as usual. I just kind of cut into the specific bottom line. The Gemara wants to understand why is placing manure, I guess we'd call that fertilizing, as opposed to picking off branches of a tree. Why is pruning? Why is that fertilizing prohibited? We have a source. The placing. Oh, sorry. So I don't like this translation. Then I'm sorry. This is not my translation, but I don't like this translation. Zium agizum, meaning they would put manure. This is not fertilizing. This is zium. They would put manure to make probably a foul odor to get rid of pests from the tree. Okay, that what zihum actually means. Zihum means how do you say it in English? Like an infection or what? Pollution, right? You pollute the tree, right? Usually we're against zihum. They would do zihum. They would put some kind of a foul pollutant on the tree to get rid of any potential adverse pests that could hurt the tree. So that was permitted. Yeah, we don't understand. Why is that permitted, yet gizum, to pick off the dead branches, that is prohibited. That was the question that was bothering it. And the Gemara says, I know the answer, there's no problem. The purpose of placing manure is to preserve the tree, and therefore it is permitted, whereas the purpose of pruning is to enhance the tree, and therefore it is prohibited. Did I say that right? Permitted and prohibited. And I'm going to tell you it in Hebrew, and that's actually what I was thinking about with the whiteboard. These are words in Aramaic. Because of the fertilizing element of it. Right? So I'm going to guess here. Again, I'm not sure how it worked in ancient agriculture, Talmudic agriculture. It may have been that it wasn't placed on the ground. I believe here it was actually applied to the tree, to the trunk, and to the branches, where I'm going to guess from my limited understanding that does not have a fertilizing effect, more just the repellent effect. Right. Do people do that? I've seen in the Ukraine, you always see the trees are, I thought it was just because on the highway, maybe, so people don't like bump into them in the nighttime. But people do that, right? Put white. There's like white. There's some lime. Right. And what's the purpose of that? Well, how does it preserve it? It's a repellent to the ants and the termites and the. Mhm. Rots it. Interesting. So it's kind of a sealant. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. And I know that basically based on the answer.
And the white stuff is not the aid.
Oh, it's special.
Not the aid. There's, I don't know how to translate it. The actual sort of a chemical. It's not just a baby.
But it's to prevent damage, or it's kind of a pest. Okay, let's assume, just for argument's sake, that that's what we're talking about here. This zihum, what I said is pollutant. Right. But by the way, in Hebrew, if you're talking about fertilizing with manure, it would be zibul, like from the mashon of zevel, not necessarily zihum. Which again, we're actually encountering now something I said I think a week or two ago, where one of the difficulties in learning Shmita really well is also kind of translating not just the words but the concepts and the activities. When we see this word, by the way, this is the problem with the translation. In other words, it may be placing manure, but we immediately assume that it's talking about fertilizing because we place manure to fertilize. But again, you have to know the context and the purpose. So la'avruye v'la'ukme. Right, those are the words the Gemara uses. We have two different purposes of activities in Shmita. Avruye v'ukume. I didn't translate. I didn't write it exactly right, but la'avruye is to enhance. To enhance. How do they translate it here? Enhance. Okay, great. And l'ukmuye, like l'kayem. L'kayem means to sustain or to preserve. Right. The question is, are you preventing damage? Preserving, preventing damage, or are you enhancing? Are you making it flourish? Are you just making it not go down to a minus, or are you taking it from 0 to a plus? Those are words which rabbis and halachists throw around all the time. And if you have a question, I want to do this in my garden, they're going to ask you, wait, is it to preserve or prevent damage, or are you enhancing and flourishing the current situation? That is based here. And it's a little more complex, but overall, I said, where do we see in the Gemara a difference? Where do we see that, coming back to irrigating, that if it's d'Rabbanan, as long as it's to prevent damage, it's okay. If you're doing it to enhance and to make it flourish, that's not okay. That's within d'Rabbanan, meaning when the rabbis instituted the prohibition of watering, of irrigating, and I know I made a little bit of a jump if anyone caught it, but that's the way it is. Watering is d'Rabbanan. That was only prohibited if the watering is to make it really robust. Maybe, you want the way apparently they do with the watermelons, at the end before they pick them, they give them a lot of water to get some extra kilo there to make the price go up, apparently. Not talking about that. Talking about making sure there is no hefsed, making sure that there is no significant loss. So if you have those two factors together, it's d'Rabbanan. And I don't mean here that the Shmita year is d'Rabbanan. The Shmita year nowadays is always d'Rabbanan. I'm talking about even when Shmita was the Oraita, when Shmita was from the Torah, this specific activity, even in the time of David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech, watering was a d'Rabbanan. Watering is a tolda, it's an offspring. It's not one of the 4 prohibited malachot we saw last week in the verses, in the Rambam. So that is the general principle. If the malacha can be identified as a d'Rabbanan and not a d'oraita, d'oraita would be planting, d'oraita would be pruning a vineyard, but watering is d'Rabbanan. And if we could identify a case where the watering is to preserve, for example, I didn't get into the Hebrew here, irrigate a field that requires irrigation. It's not a field, in the Gemara, there's two kinds of fields. The field that could get by with the rainwater, but you want to make this crop extra good, right? For example, I saw a tshuva regarding, a response regarding esrogim. The esrogim will get by, but let's say you want to put extra water so that the esrogim, this sukkis, come on extra muhudar. That would be extra, right? But a field that needs irrigation, it relies on the artificial watering. That's what the Mishnah permitted. Now it's coming back to the Mishnah. Now we know why the Mishnah, you said, Beit HaShlachim. That may be the reason there's a kibbutz called Shluchot. You have a kibbutz Shluchot not far from Beit Shan. That may be why the source of the word Shluchot, because in Aramaic, in Talmudic Hebrew, a field that relies on irrigation is called Beit HaShlachim. Shlachin is connected, its root is connected to thirsty. The thirsty. It's a thirsty field. It can't get by on just the rainwater, whereas Sadeh Ba'al, a Sadeh that actually has a husband, as it were, that refers to the rain. It doesn't need the irrigation. That's what the Gemara says. There could be other explanations as well. So we see from this Gemara the principle, if it needs it to prevent damage, to sustain it, and it's a d'Rabbanan, it's okay. Now, the main question we have to understand now is, when you say to preserve, when you say avoid a loss of what? What are you trying to avoid a loss? And I'll be very specific. Are you trying to keep, let's say you have a tree in your garden. Are you trying to keep the tree alive so that next year, after the Shmita, it will bear fruit and won't die, wither, or be permanently damaged? Or are you trying to prevent damage to this year's fruit, to the fruit of this year's crop? If you don't water this pomegranate tree in the Shmita, the pomegranates of Shmita will come out shriveled, withered, and substandard. So you want to prevent damage to the crop. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. All right, a simple question. Oh, right. So I will relate to that question about which crop. Is it this year's crop? Are you doing something for next year's crop? I will relate to that in a minute. I'm going to ask you a simple question. What do you think? What do you think? Everything you know about Shmita, what are we trying to prevent? The loss or damage called the infrastructure, the tree and into the field potentially, as we'll see in the Rambam in a second? Or are we trying to prevent loss to the actual fruit that we are trying to eat? Before you answer, let me give you one sentence or two of background. And I think this is important. We know that in Shmita, besides the prohibitions of working the land, there are also halachot which regulate the status of the fruit, right? All the fruit that does grow on a tree. I didn't do anything. I didn't touch the tree. Fruit still grows. That fruit has holiness. It's kadosh with the kedushat shvi'it, with the holiness of Shmita. And that fruit is hefker. I cannot assert exclusive ownership of that fruit. Anyone, including me, but just like anyone else, can come and eat from that fruit. In other words, Shmita does have an element of, there is permissibility. In fact, there's a mitzvah to eat the fruit of Shmita. That's background number one before you make your vote, which way you think it goes. Second point, I think, is just also important to think about. I like to think about this Shmita as opposed to Yovel, right? Yovel, the Jubilee year, once every 50 years. It's like in Shmita, what we're foregoing, what we're releasing, right? Shmita means to release. What we're releasing is the fruit. I'm not taking ownership. Do you think some neighbor of mine can come into my garden and take off my pomegranates? Yeah, he can do that. Can he come and uproot my pomegranate tree? No. Can he come and put a fence in my fields are hefker. I heard the fields are hefker. The fields are abandoned. So okay, I'm gonna assert, like in Tzfat, people come take over a churva. It's mine, right? Can you do that in Shmita? No, Shmita is not about the land or the tree. It's really about what's hefker is the fruit. The Jubilee year in Yovel, if you think about it conceptually, what really is going on, it goes deeper. After 7 Shmitas, we actually release the land itself from ownership. In other words, any lands that were bought throughout this 50-year period that took away someone's original tribal inheritance, their tribal land, their plot, their family plot from the time of Yoshua ben Nun, that goes back, resets, right? That relates to the actual infrastructure. That relates to the field itself. Okay, so I told you 2 points. So how many people here think that when we're allowed to prevent damage, we're preventing loss, we're only allowed to prevent damage to the tree, to the infrastructure, and to the field? 1. Okay. You think so too? Okay. And you want to suggest a reason for that direction? Why? Wait. Right. Well, why aren't you concerned with the quality of the fruit? Or maybe you want it for the seed. Why are you not concerned? Meaning, according to what you're saying, I'm not gonna prevent damage to the crop itself. Because it's planting or planning. Oh, she's saying, wait a second, if you're only doing this, so your whole thing is for the next year, so it's even worse. You're saying it's not worse, it's not better, it's worse, you're saying. You're saying it's not yours. In other words, if I'm doing something, here I am, Mr. Nice Guy, I'm like trying to improve and prevent damage to this. So what am I really saying? Am I Mr. Nowadays people do that. Those days didn't have Save the Whales, but today, people do things kind of altruistically just for the sake of the fruit. But technically speaking, from 100 years ago and before, if you're doing something, exerting energy and resources and precious water to make sure the fruit is okay, what you're really saying is, that's mine. I really, right? Go ahead.
Why do we have to take care of it and can benefit from what we're doing? So you just want the trees to be your effort. So why put all your energy into all of that? You don't want to get anything out of it.
So you're saying, and therefore don't. Therefore it's prohibited to save the tree. Right. So that's what they're saying. You know who says like that? By the way, I hope you realize both sides are going to be right. Okay. 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 I guess if you're laughing, you didn't realize that you were tense. You weren't sure. It was okay. The answer is, that is interesting. Here we have something very interesting for those of you who kind of follow kind of hashkafa, different religious philosophies in the Orthodox world. Your opinion is called the strict opinion. That's the opinion of. I'll let you guess between who and who. It's a machlokes between the Chazon Ish and Rav Kook. Chazon Ish. Everyone say Chazon Ish? Rav Kook. Many times, bichlal, you should know, in general in halacha, I would not want to find a single posek that all along is going to be exclusively lenient. Certainly nowadays, Beis Hillel we do know, but that's different. That's like heavenly kind of. But even Beis Hillel had chumras, where they were more strict than Beis Shammai. But we always will expect someone looking for truth. It can't be that the truth will always be on the strict side or always be on the lenient side. But specifically in this case, because Rav Kook, what I mentioned last week, was one of the founding fathers, as it were, of what's called the Heter Mechira, which was kind of this overall, I don't want to say quick fix, but for lack of, general remedy, tikkun klali, for the quote unquote the challenge of Shmita 100 years ago. So people think, oh, he's the makil one, Shmita, but it's kind of the backwards. Exactly. In other words, once you have that kula, so he can quote unquote, and I use this cautiously, allow himself to be stripped. The Chazon Ish, who did not accept the heter mechira, and I mentioned this last week from the Ridbaz, there are real questions that have to do with parnasa. I don't know if it's pikuach nefesh, but it is certainly livelihood. It has ramifications for Am Yisrael in general, being in Eretz Yisrael. The Chazon Ish had many kulas in Shmita. Usually we think of Chazon Ish, the big Kiddush cup, the sukkah walls like this. Chazon Ish. There are many kulas. Can I say, I'm not such an expert, I can tell you that Chazon Ish is more makil than Rav Kook in general, but don't be surprised when you see kulas from the Chazon Ish and Shmita for the two reasons I just said. Reason number one, because any ish emet will always have both sides, because life is complicated. It's not always going to be on one side or the other. And secondly, because you don't have that safety net of heter mechira, you have to do your best to find halachic solutions for real world problems. So that's the Chazon Ish was lenient in this question. The Rav Kook, he said you could only do what's good for the tree itself. And he was not concerned, as you mentioned, about hachana for next year, because why not? Because we don't find that. We don't find that similarity between Shmita and Shabbos. If the actual act is permitted, if it's not a real malacha, it's not a prohibited labor in Shmita, the fact that it's for next year is not really a problem. That's Rav Kook's Shita. What does the Chazon Ish hold? The fruits aren't yours. So what are you doing? You're asserting your ownership. How could you do watering to prevent damage to the fruit? What do you care about the fruits? So there's two answers to this question, which are both beautiful. One is that the Chazon Ish says, and this is people explaining the Chazon Ish. I believe it's Maril Diskin and maybe Rav Karelitz, I don't remember, but the Talmidim of the Chazon Ish, contemporaries of the Chazon Ish. Number one, yeah, it's not mine, but this is the fruit of Am Yisrael. And the fruit of Am Yisrael, I'm part of Am Yisrael and everyone's part of it. And the Torah expressed its opinion that this is lo ochla, it is to be eaten. The Torah wants this fruit to be eaten by Am Yisrael. So I'm not acting on behalf of myself. This is called an activity on behalf of Am Yisrael. Here you have the idea of people who will, just go along a beach and pick up the litter, or go in trees and, random trees that aren't theirs and take care of it, or take care of wild sea turtles and things like that. It's for Am Yisrael. The fruit is for Am Yisrael. So you take care of it. The fact that it's kadosh doesn't mean that you don't prevent damage. Are you allowed to make it flourish, enhancing, la'agruye? No. Don't forget, we're only talking about d'Rabbanan activities and only to prevent damage. But that's what the Chazon Ish holds. And the second element, I guess there are two sides of the same coin. One is the Torah said the fruit is to be eaten, right? And if the Torah said that there is a role of this fruit in the Shemitah year, then I can ensure that there will be what to be eaten. And the second side of the coin is for whom, am I doing this, or who will it be eaten by? That's by Klal Yisrael. So that's the other side of it. So those are really the two sides. The Rambam, they debate in the Rambam. The Rambam has, we'll read it and then I'll sum up a halacha l'maisa. The Rambam, you obviously realize, that if the Rambam would say one way or the other, it wouldn't be a machloket in the 20th century, right? The Rambam would have decided this already in the 12th century. But how they read it's really a question of one of the questions here is, how do you read this Rambam? I did this as a very hasty translation. I don't think I did justice to it, but at least you can see kind of a summary of everything we talked about here in the Rambam, which I say again, the Rambam is our Shulchan Aruch. The Rambam is kind of the bottom line halacha. At the third source here, Rambam in the first parak of Hilchos Shmita, halacha number 9, and I'll read it just in the English. I'm sorry, I wish I did. I'll give you mine afterwards, and if someone can take a picture. Okay. Okay. And for you in Zoom, you can look at the bottom source in the sheet. And I apologize, I just saw the camera was kind of at a weird angle. Says the Rambam, it is permitted to irrigate a thirsty field. Hey, we saw that in the Mishnah, right? That was the very first source. And a field that receives water from rain, meaning it's not relying solely on irrigation, it can get by with rain, says the Rambam. It can also be watered because of the trees so that they are not lost. Shelo bishvila ilanot, for the trees, shelo yipasdu, that they will not be lost. And of course, the question here is, when you say the trees, are you worried about long-term damage to the trees? Or when you say the trees, as the Chazon Ish, the lenient opinion says, what do you mean trees? It's the trees with their fruit shouldn't be lost. That's how the Chazon Ish will read this. Trees really doesn't mean just the trunk. The tree means with the crop, with the fruit. And the Rambam continues, this is very interesting. To me, it seems like this is in favor of Rav Kook's strict opinion, the next line, where the Chazon Ish does have a way to read this. I'm going to read it in Hebrew and in English to make sure I'm precise. Why is this permitted, this irrigating? For if one would not water it, the earth would become salty. There's probably a more professional word for that. What is it when the earth becomes kind of acidic, maybe? Is that what we call it? Acidic? It would, right? If you don't take care, you don't just have a problem with your tree. You may actually have a problem with your soil, with the actual earth, with the most basic infrastructure here, right? There's earth, there's tree, and there's fruit. So that, it really does seem like the Rambam is worried about the infrastructure. He's not worried about the fruit. It does seem a little bit to be, just from a layman's point of view, it does seem to be kind of pointing in the direction of Rav Kook. I rest assured the Chazon Ish knew how to read a Rambam, and he had a way of reading it, because he emphasizes the next line, v'yamut kol eitz shaba, and all its trees would die. And the Chazon Ish reads into eitz, as I mentioned before, eitz meaning not just the actual trunk of the tree, the branches of the tree, but the fruit of the tree would die. That's how he reads into this. I'm not like so holding in the little nuances here, but that's, this Rambam kind of sums it up, but you also see the room for the dispute, what to do. Okay, now we come to halacha l'maisa, and because it's halacha l'maisa, the practical halacha, I always want to make sure I'm saying it correctly from the source, from a posting, from the book. Okay, so I'll just give you a couple quick things in the garden and Shmita and house and watering. I've seen that the overall halachic consensus is you certainly don't have to worry about this. Maybe it seems funny to you, but the poskim do discuss that very Israeli halacha of sponging, where you're sponging into your balcony or out your front door, and the water is going into your garden. Now, of course, overall principle. If it's soapy water, then it's not a question. That's called that's called killing, right? But assuming that you're not this is your rinse, not your wash, then you have a patio, or I have a courtyard, you spray it down with just water and you just sweep it out. So even if that the grass doesn't need it, the grass is going to be fine outside. It's not a case of preserving it. It's going to enhance the grass. You often see sometimes, like by drainage pipes, there's a lot of like very bushy grass there. That's not your problem. Why? Even if it's enhancing, no big deal. Why? Because that's not your intention. It's not your intention. On Shabbos we could talk about it. Shabbos it may be more strict. The same would be true about a air conditioner. What's it called? The hose, right? The drainage, right? Sometimes people don't want to waste that water. They put it directly into their garden and preserve the water that way. That also is not a problem, even if you're running your AC full time and those plants are not just being preserved, they're being enhanced because it's indirected that way. That's not your main objective, even if you're benefiting from it. You like the fact that those roses are so robust, but that's not a problem. Where it may be more of a problem, I didn't check this out in all the sources, but I did see a source, for example, on Sukkot. We know on Shabbos and Sukkah, also on any Yom Tif and Sukkah. I don't know if it's so really relevant in Tzfat. Tzfat has so much stone, but if you have a sukkah on dirt or on the grass on a lawn, so sometimes you want to go back up to wash the Tilat Yadayim. People will wash the Tilat Yadayim outside. That's a problem because you really are watering for your hands, right? But you're actually also watering. That's more direct, it seems. In other words, there's a distinction between the air conditioning and the sponja as opposed to the Tilat. I didn't check that in all the sources. I just saw one source that said that. It could be that there are others who are lenient in that, but I did see that. So unless we find out otherwise, so keep that in mind when you're eating and you're having a garden party and eating washing the Tilat Yadayim outside on the grass. Now, another question that comes up regarding Shmita is now, in general, it seems that the poskim like I don't. Tzfat, I don't know. Do you have like a whole computerized? You water with a hose? How do you water with a can?
Sometimes my question is,
Oh, that was what I'm talking about. Right. So you're sophisticated. So you have a drip system on a timer. They have these it's almost like it's a computer. It's a mini computer. You probably people have it on their phones these days. Right? Probably have irrigation on your application. So one may have thought, I got the best idea. It's like a Shabbos clock, right? Before Shabbos, like on, lights off, air conditioner on, air conditioner off. Erev Rosh Hashanah, I have this computerized system. I got a whole garden. I'm going to put it full power. I'm not going to just I'm going to enhance it. But I push the button before Shmita. So the poskim don't like this so much for two reasons. One reason is because it gets into what we talked about 2 times ago. It's Shabbos Haaretz. It's not just about you doing something. The ground is being enhanced. It's being cultivated. It's a function of the chefs, of the object, not just of the person. That's one issue here. The other issue is also Maris Ayin. Did we talk about that last week? Oh, I got to tell you a funny joke. This does not count. This is true. I promise you this is true. This is true. A guy told me this, that Judy's, we're almost finished. Give me 2 minutes. The joke does not count, but it's a true story. You have to hear this. I hope you think it's funny. A guy has a student, he's a Baal Tshuva. He was apparently working in fixing air conditioners. He was called into McDonald's to fix the air conditioner there. He's a frum guy, but he was wearing a hat. You couldn't necessarily identify him as a religious Jew. He's inside McDonald's, and in comes a chassid and orders a Coke. So this guy, the air conditioner technician, looking at the chassid, can't hold back. Goes, I think this is. He says to him, "No, Morris Ayin." So he goes, Morris, nice to meet you. I'm Jack Isaiah. I'm from whatever it's called in Pennsylvania. He was Amish. Right. Morris Ayin, right? Morris Ayin, right? Okay. Apparently a true story. Anyway, the second issue with the sprinkler automatic, if you're having full blast, we're talking about full blast, enhancing, right? If I put it on advanced timer, the second issue, Mars Ayin. Those who are walking by may not realize that. The other side of the coin is, first of all, as we already said, we don't really consider halachically so much that the earth rests. We really do look at the person more. And secondly, Mars Ayin, that may apply when it may look like something not good. That may be when it was rare. Now it's so, I think technically speaking, don't quote me, I'm not 100% sure. Technically speaking, you could even have your sprinklers on Shabbos go. We don't even choshesh, we don't start with Mars Ayin because we're so used to this as a regular function like this. People don't, people don't say, "Oh, I saw the light go on in Mirvis's house." That's not. You hear also the air conditioning go on, go off. That's not our. So there are 2 different opinions about that. If you want to do that, but that's talking about doing it before Shmita. In other words, before Rosh Hashanah, you have an whole annual system, like a fancy. Right. Okay, so that's about that. But I kind of evaded the last point, which is the bottom line, is what can you water, what can you not water? How do we paskin in this machloka between Rav Kook and Rav and the Chazon Ish? So the answer is, so this is kind of related to something I said last week. First of all, we have Bisman Hazeh these days a double D'Rabbanan. Shmita itself is D'Rabbanan, and watering is a prohibited activity D'Rabbanan. So the double D'Rabbanan, that allows us to move more lenient away from Rav Kook. But when are we going to do that? That's really only when there's like, for the sake of Chaklaim, for the farmers. When it's when their livelihood, they have big tracts of land, and when it's a very significant factor in their life, then we can be makil. Get this, don't forget, we can be makil like the Chazon Ish, right?
Why
Right.
you add another fruit and vegetable to feed yourself? It's not a profit crop, you have to take it to market. Is that considered a financial loss?
But and this is how you just, it's not just, oh, cute thing, why I have one cucumber, it's like, this is how you eat. I would venture to say that you could be makil. You could be lenient. Is that your case? But by the way, you mentioned vegetables. One of the big differences between a cook and the Chazon Ish is vegetables, because a tree is here next year. It's perennial. Vegetables, by definition, if I want to make sure that you want to do what? Unless you're worried about the acidity of the soil, but there is no tree, there is no next year. So only according to the Chazon Ish can you talk about preventing damage to the vegetables. But in general, not in Tzipporah's case where a person really is nourished by her own garden, but if you just have a general, regular, private garden, it's best to be machmir, like Rav Kook, and only do things which are for the health and the long-term benefit and prevent damage to either the tree or to the soil, but not to prevent damage to the. Don't do any extra watering. I'm not a gardener, so I don't know the difference. In general, what you should know is that I'll tell you just two more things. This, we're going to get into this another time, but I'll tell you now, I'll remind you another time. This only applies, what Rav Kook is saying, Rav Kook's Chumrah, to fruits of Shmita, which are hefker. Don't forget, this year, let's say the olives of this Hanukkah, those aren't Shmita olives, right? They already blossomed before Rosh Hashanah. The pomegranates that you have after Rosh Hashanah, they're pomegranates that blossom before. Those, what? Lemons is complicated. It depends on, lemons is complicated. I can't answer you right now. Right, so even according to Rav Kook, what was Rav Kook's point? Rav Kook's point was, it's hefker. How can you take care of something that's hefker? It's not yours. You're asserting your balut. Those pomegranates are yours. Those olives are yours because they're the olives of year 6. You're going to have to worry about Rav Kook's Chumrah when? Next year, the olives of Tafshin Pei Gimel. Okay, that's a second point. In general, and I'll come back to this maybe even next week, because I know it's the end and it's hard to concentrate. But when doing the watering to preserve in your private garden, you want to do only to preserve and not to enhance. And to preserve, unless there's extenuating circumstances, preserving the tree and the soil. To go out of your way to preserve the kadosh fruits, right? Flowers that don't have kedusha shvi, it's not a problem. They're not hefker. But the fruit that's hefker, you don't do any extra steps or watering for them. But the watering that you do apply, you should do it at more spaced out intervals. You can do far between. So if you usually water your lawn, for example, twice a week, 3 times, I don't know what, do it once a week. But once you're doing it, you're allowed to keep it on longer to make sure that the grass gets what it needs. It's better to do one action at a single time than more often a little time. And again, it's only what you need to keep your grass from growing brown, not to like make it again enhanced, robust. I wish I was more of a farmer to tell you, what the different kinds of grass, with the roses this way or that way. But if you're a gardener, you know what the difference is, and that's what you want to do. But by the way, you do not have to wait till it begins shriveling up, right? You can do preventative medicine, right? It's not just when it's it's brown, let me turn on the hose. That's how we work. But that's all 7 years we do it that way. So we said before that even if you have a fancy computer system, you would think it'd be okay before Shmita, just plug it in and do whatever you want, right? So there many Rabbi Yosef seem to have been against it, but those who are lenient say that nowadays it's so common, there's no issue of Maras Ayin, and we're not really concerned that the land is not resting. So it could go both ways. In general, by the way, it's better to use a sprinkler system than use a hose, because the hose is a more active, direct way as opposed to the sprinkler. And I'm not talking about the computerized sprinkler, just the regular sprinkler. And again, I don't know if people even have sprinklers, but right, or a drip system, right? And going out there with the hose and applying it. Yes. Till Rosh Hashanah, correct. And when you fertilize in your garden, it's best, even though I said, I don't know, right, exactly. So for sure until Rosh Hashanah. After Rosh Hashanah, fertilizing is a D'Rabbanan. It's a rabbinic prohibition. So we said technically, I don't even know if it's possible to fertilize to prevent damage. I don't know if that even maybe is an oxymoron, but usually fertilizing, right? It just makes it grow more, right? So I can't imagine. And nowadays, in general, there's fertilizers that are kind of time released you put into your garden, and so for sure that's what you should do before Shmita, because it's be hard to conceive of a case of applying fertilizer to prevent damage, right? That doesn't make so much sense to me. But again, before you can go up to Rosh Hashanah. Right. You can. Right. I hear where you're coming from. Saying the irrigation computer, maybe not, but the fertilizer you can put in, time release, whatever. Go. Right. Yes. Right. On a hanging thing. Oh, it's sitting in it. Right. Right. Oh, so you're saying this, if I understand you correctly, you're saying this. So first of all, if they have are they over the ground? They're like hovering over the ground and under a roof or not under a roof? Because not under a roof. Okay, fine. So that's the first thing you have to understand. Okay, so that should be treated pretty much as though it was in the ground. Number one. We learned that last week, so that's clear. Great. Number two, so here you're saying, why don't we apply Rav Kook's stringent opinion and say that, hey, what am I preserving this for? There's no fruit, there's no tree. But don't forget, there is no Kedusha Shvius here either. So there's nothing hefker here. So it's really no different if you have an apple tree. So Rav Kook would say, don't do anything for the apples, just take care of the tree. Here, the plant is the tree. So take care of it. Why not? Preventing damage. Preventing damage. No, right. No, exactly. I should have been clear with that. There's financial damage, and then there's damage to the actual plant, to the right. It still wouldn't go because remember last week we learned 2.5 things. First of all, for a potted plant to be kind of exempt from Shmita, it needs to be, yes, with a plate underneath, and it needs to be under a roof, and those are the two things. The half a thing was that it needs to have both factors. So here in her case, it wasn't under a roof, and even if it would be under a roof, it would still be okay. What was the half thing? So I was going to say what we said. Thank you. Remember, we said that if you have a planter that's attached to the building on the outside, so even if it's considered part of the building and the building is attached, but that would be regarding planting. Here we're talking about watering. You can be lenient, even though it's attached to the building. Yes, I'll relate to that. I got you. Tzipora asked me last week. She has a hanging apparatus like that, but instead of going outside, it's attached to her building, but it's on the inside, and that's permitted because it's under the roof. So you can water that as you see. Don't plant in it, but you can water in it. Okay, yeah. Compost, so you're gonna have to forgive me. I'm such an Amor. Right. So compost, I know that you make compost. What's the purpose of compost? It's a fertilizing agent. Right. Right.
And I take that and I take that and I put it into my soil.
You add that to the soil. So you're asking whether that can be applied to the soil, whether you can make the compost. So regarding applying it to the soil, that would be the same as a fertilizer, and that would be only in cases where you needed to prevent the damage to your plants. Regarding making it, I saw the halakha literature discusses it. I didn't get a chance to look at it. Bli Neder next week. We're on to that. We had other questions last week. Someone else asked the question. I have it written down. Who had a question last week? I didn't answer. Oh, someone asked. I think it was maybe who had a question. I said last week. I just remember the question that was brought up last week. I said even if you have a potted plant, even if it's under the roof, you can do if for agricultural reasons, for financial loss, you can they plant in greenhouses which are detached from the ground. But to do that little science experiment in the classroom, or for you to plant your geraniums in a potted plant under the roof, we try to avoid that because Zriya planting is Doraita. And even though it's just kind of a, is it forbidden? You can't say it's forbidden, but is it permitted? You don't plant in Shmita. It's better to avoid it unless you really need to. So someone asked, so why did I say that you take off the dead leaves? Isn't that pruning? And pruning is also Doraita. So I looked into it to the best I could. I asked the rabbi who really knows, asked the author of the book. Actually, he didn't get back to me yet. But when I went back and researched it, I understand it to be, and again, I feel out of my element because I'm not such an expert in house garden, house planting, house plants. What it says, he says taking off the dead leaves from the plant. Now, I don't know, is that the same as pruning? You do that so that it grows, or you do that because it just looks bad, or because it rots? It's more because it looks bad. It's not. That's not pruning. So that's what I said was. In other words, it may be the same thing. You're taking off. In other words, in pruning, if I understand correctly, you probably take off good things when you prune. Also, you don't take off bad things, but you just need to have less density to have more nutrients. So unless he tells me otherwise, that would be the difference. Taking off a bad thing, which would be kind of an aesthetic issue, as opposed to kind of thinning it out. If you have a bonsai and you want to trim it so it looks nice, you're allowed to do that. If you have a hedge, by the way, you have a hedge, is that what they call it, a hedge? Right? Maybe these are Americans, but my new house that we're moving to has a hedge. The landlord warned me, you better keep that hedge. I was like, it's Shmita. No, it's okay. He said, you're allowed to give it a haircut if it's for the purpose of aesthetics. If it's for the purpose, let's say it's a new hedge, and by cutting it, it kind of fills in, then you shouldn't do that. Yes. Oh, okay. You got to get rid of the snakes. Yeah. No, you can cut it. Yeah, you can cut it. You can cut it. You even have to cut your grass for aesthetic reasons as well. Again, just like that hedge, you're not allowed to cut your grass if it's, for example, new grass, and that by cutting it, it kind of repopulates and propagates the seeds or whatever it does and kind of flourishes it. Then you're not allowed to cut your grass. That's why we said if anyone wants to plant, to roll out a real grass or plant grass, you be done way in advance, not just two valve, so that you'll be able to cultivate. You won't get into a situation where you need to give the extra irrigation and the extra mowing. How many people here have a lawn mower? I don't think it exists in spot. It doesn't. You're not in Bansi anymore, right? That's a word. Oh, again, right. Look around, every day this year, right? Yeah. So again, any danger where it's not for the purpose, you can that would be basically uprooting it. You're not just mowing it. That would be permitted. Sure, please.
And since those are we cut back the remnant.
Right.
And Shmita, you'll have to do that?
So I'm almost sure that not, but but let me give you. I'll give you for next week, right? Right. We have how many classes left to this season? After this, 3 more. So I'll tell you what I know. We're definitely gonna talk about Hetch. All right, I'll take care of like the loose ends of like the garden in the beginning of next week because we still need to cover a lot. We need to cover. I want to do one whole class on Hetcher Mechir, like the history of Shmita and that whole controversy of the last 150 years. I want to also a short class on also on kind of Shmita in the kitchen. We've been talking about the garden, but forgetting that you're growing things. But what about things you buy from Yoram or from the Shuk? The idea of the kedusha of the vegetables up to now or the fruits. Up to now we've only been talking about the activities, and then we can talk about the status. So I'll try to devote a class to that to that as well. The Shmita garbage can. So I have compost. I have the vines. We have what else is loose here? Open still. Tomatoes. I'm working on the tomatoes. Oh, the plants in the fish tank. Yeah, I know. I'm working on it. I promise you, I'm working on it. It's such a good question. I could not find. The only person I could find to ask this question. I asked it, and I'm still in a back and forth. I don't have. No, but she's doing. But she's saying you're allowed to do hydroponic with that. But if I understood her correctly, they actually take root, or they in the gravel. Right, you're planting it's like planting seaweed. But it's not hydroponic. Hydroponics, it's just growing right in the water, like an avocado that you put in a cup of water, right? No, but she's saying that it actually shoots roots into the ground of the aquarium, right? You hear it? It's like, can you go scuba diving and plant something in the seabed, right?
That's like hydroponics also.
Oh,
You would in bags and then the waters are going down.
oh, you're saying, I don't know enough. I can maybe, I'm going to guess, I'll just give you a guess now and say, I'm going to guess yes. I'm going to give you a finalized answer next week, but you know why? Because it's indoors. Anyway, you're under, if I said it was a potted plant, it's not the end of the world to plant indoors. It's just not so seemly to do. Right. So here it's no worse than a potted plant, and you have the water factor. It's not even clear really is it taking root or they're just like holding on. Is it being nourished from the soil? Right. It's nourished. Right, but it's not from the ground. It's not from the ground. It's not from the. So I'm guessing it's going to be okay. I'd be very surprised if not, but I want to give you a quality authoritative answer. And 2 people I asked about the tomatoes. Oh, you didn't ask me about the tomatoes? Who asked me about the tomatoes? Who asked me about the tomatoes was the bracha on smelling tomatoes. That wasn't. We know you say there's a bracha if you smell an esrog. A fruit has a beautiful fragrance. Would you say the same bracha when you pick a tomato has a beautiful fragrance, like fresh, like vegetable, like? Do you say a bracha on that? I have one question. No, so I asked already 2 people getting back and forth. There's a couple of issues here. First of all, when you pick it, it's still tevel. It still needs to have trumas and meisos. You're not allowed to eat it yet. So does that, number one, take away the ability to have a bracha, right? Oh, you buy. Oh, not that you picked it just. It comes with the vine. I thought you were picking it from the ground. Oh, so we could be leaning to a yes then. I was leaning to a no. That's good that you supplied that. Next week, all the answers come back. Right. So unless Elijah comes earlier, if Elijah comes earlier, he'll answer your question.
You were saying that the fruit during Shmita, the tree actually becomes fruit.
Right.
And he becomes sticky.
So take care of God's garden.
Take care of God's garden during Shmita.
I think
and
that.
We're feeding on this from. And look at the soup coming up. And it's the situation that we're in. And we need unity. And that's part of the unity.
Part of unity. So you're not thinking, but you're doing something where you're not getting more benefit than anyone else. It's for God. Could be very well that's
Very special year.
it's a very, very special year.
This year is special.
Or this week,
This
yeah.
year is special. It's even more
Yeah.
important. Okay.
I have a question,
Sure.
something we learned last week.
Sure.